Good afternoon. We can begin by taking refuge. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. And I take refuge in Sangha. Hidden Lamp, Case 9. 7 Sisters in the Charnel Ground. 7 wise sisters planned a spring journey. One of them said, "Sisters, instead of going to a park to enjoy the spring flowers, let's go see the charnel grounds." The other said, "That place is full of decaying corpses. What is such a place good for?" The first woman replied, "Let's just go. Very good things are there." When they arrived, one of them pointed to a corpse and said, "There's a person's body. Where has the person gone?" "What?" another said. "What did you say?" And all 7 sisters were immediately enlightened. So this is a koan. And one way to read a koan is that every character in the story is you. So I imagine you might have had your own experience with the first part of this koan. Perhaps as some inner dialogue as you registered for this sesshin. Part of you said, "Oh, let's go to the Parinirvana Sesshin. You know, the one about death." While other parts are saying, "Why go to the one in February when we could go to a spring sesshin? You know, when all the flowers are blooming and they'll let us meditate outside. And plus, why meditate on death? What is such a practice good for?" Very applicable. And then some part of you must have said, in some way, "Trust me, it's good practice," as you press the button to register for sesshin. Or maybe if you're a resident and didn't register for this sesshin, or if you're someone, there's always a few people who registered for this sesshin because it worked in your schedule, and you didn't even know that there was a theme. And now there's an inner dialogue that's something more like, well, just because the teachers are inviting us to turn towards impermanence and recollect that we will die, I'm just going to do my practice. What are such recollections good for? Well, whether we recollect death or not, sesshin can feel a bit like going to a charnel grounds, no matter what the theme. And just like the sisters in this story, some of us come to the charnel grounds or to sesshin or to practice by choice. A curiosity, a longing, a desire to understand with more of our being who and what we are, what this life is. And perhaps we've heard talk from the sutras or the Zen stories or had our own tastes of this unborn Buddha mind, the deathless, and are curious about that. Is there something that does not die, that wasn't born, that I can know in the depth of my being? We feel called, like the goddess Inanna, the Sumerian goddess who's like the Roman goddess Venus, who's the goddess of beauty and love, were called, like she was, from our above ground preoccupations with appearance or status or success and fame. We know that there is more to life than the surface mind chatter of our thoughts and the superficial desires that pull us this way and that way, this way and that way. In Inanna's myth, she turns her ear to the great below, where ear is synonymous with wisdom. Inner wisdom invites us into the charnel grounds of Sesshin. Something calls us deeper, deeper still. And then others of us perhaps found ourselves in the charnel grounds before we signed up for Sesshin, before we even discovered this practice, the Buddha way. Maybe it was a circumstance in our lives that brought us to the charnel grounds, a death of a loved one, a loss of a relationship or a job, falling sick, or someone we love dearly fell sick, got ill, or had a scare. Something happened that woke us up to the truth of impermanence. And the change in the political climate can be its own call. We feel bereft, lost, uncertain. We don't hear in this story from all of the sisters in the Koan. But I imagine some of them already felt like they were at the charnel grounds. I think of the story of Patacara, one of the Buddha's women disciples. So I'd like to read her story now. She's someone, as are many of the women ancestors, someone who came to practice through great loss. Her story is pretty mythic, and many of you may have heard it. Patacara was born into a banker's family in the town of Savatthi. When she was a young woman, her parents arranged for her to marry a young man of equal rank. But one of the family servants was her lover, and defying her parents' wishes, she ran away with him and set up house in a remote place. Months passed and she became pregnant. As her pregnancy came to term, she wanted to go to her parents' home and have their care at the time of birth. Her husband procrastinated, and one day, while he was out, she left. He soon discovered what had happened, followed Patacara, and overtook her midway to Savatthi. There, labor came on, and she gave birth safely. And together, they returned to their dwelling place. Later, a second child was conceived. Once more, Patacara really wanted to return to her parents' home, and once more, her husband was reluctant. Again, she left without him, taking their child, and again, he pursued and caught up with her as her labor was beginning. But this time, a great storm rose up. Patacara needed shelter, and her husband, while hurriedly cutting grass and stakes in the forest to build a hut, was bitten by a poisonous snake and died. Thinking herself abandoned, Patacara gave birth alone and passed the night lying over her children, using her body to protect them from the storm. In the morning, she discovered her husband's body and was paralyzed with grief for a full day and night. When the second day dawned, she again took up the journey to her parents' home. She came to a river swollen by floodwaters. Too weak to carry both children across at once, she took the newborn first. On the far side, she placed the child on a pile of leaves, but was so reluctant to leave him that she looked behind her again and again. Halfway back across the river, she saw a hawk seize her newborn and carry him off. The hawk ignored Patachara's screams, but the older child, thinking his mother was calling him, came up to the riverbank, fell in, and drowned. In utter despair, all Patacara could do was resume her journey. On the outskirts of Savatthi, she met a townsman and asked him whether he knew her family. He said, "Don't ask me about them. Ask about anything else." She replied, "But there's nothing else I care about." And then he said, "You saw how the god rained all last night. Your family's house collapsed and fell on them. They are all burning on the pyre, the banker, wife, and son. You can see the smoke." With that, Patacara went out of her mind. She wandered around in circles. Her clothing became ragged and fell off. Her name, which means cloak walker, refers to this. The townspeople drove her off with sticks and rubbish. One day, still overcome with grief, still walking around in circles, she entered Jeta's grove, where the Buddha was preaching. Those who had gathered to listen wanted to keep her away, but the Buddha followed her and put himself in her path. As she encountered him, he said, "Sister, recover your presence of mind." And with that care, with that seeing, with that compassion, she came back to herself. And she recovered her presence of mind. She saw that she was naked, and a man threw his outer robe to her. "Help me," she said to the Buddha, and she told him her terrible story. He replied, "Patacara, don't think you have come to someone who can help you. In your many lives, you have shed more tears for the dead than there is water in the 4 oceans." This made her grief less heavy. He went on to say that when she herself went to another world, no kin could help. That even in this world, no kin could help. And he told her about the Buddha's path. When he finished, she asked if she could be ordained. And together they went to the community of nuns, and she was ordained. There's more about Patacara. She went on to become a great teacher. And notice her story doesn't end with a complete enlightenment experience. She practices the way for quite a while. before she feels like she really attained awakening. So some of us find our practice through loss. Though this story seems mythic in how quickly all of the loved ones in Patachara's life pass away, I know people who have had losses similar to Patacara, or over the course of a year endured the loss of parents, and then a husband, and then a child. Or others who have decades of loss, where one relationship after another or one thing after another vanishes. One of our Sangha members in Columbus lost her husband when she was young, then her daughter when her daughter was in her 20s. And then she developed a chronic illness, and then she lost her job. And she often says impermanence is her path, equanimity within change. And she, like many perhaps in this room, or many in our Sangha, are elders of the charnel ground, can help others navigate loss and find footing, as Chosen Roshi would say, on the groundless ground. When I shared Patachara's story in a class I was teaching on the women ancestors, a trans woman shared that Patachara's story resonates with the reality of many trans women she knows, whose family of origin abandoned them when they come out, and as they transition, their partner abandoned them, and then they lost custody of their children. Very real reality for many people. So perhaps loss of one form or another brought you to this sesshin. Brushes with impermanence. I want to say a little more about Patachara's story. Again, all of these stories that we have, we can read them like as if they were koans, where all the characters are us. So here we bear witness to what grief can feel like or look like. To lose all that we love, all that is dear to us. It can be disorienting, to say the least. Not only do we lose the people we love, we also lose parts of ourselves. The future that we imagined for ourselves with them in it. I personally haven't faced that kind of loss, the same kind as Patacara, but I remember a sudden breakup with someone I was very close to. And at the moment it happened, and for days it felt like my life was over. That experience of the future, which was so, never defined, but always contained them in my mind, suddenly was empty space. And I had no idea how to take the next step without them. And Patacara experiences her grief deeply. I think that example of Patacara is a reminder that we too, and part of this path is to feel our feelings. Grief is a natural part of loss, and grief can take many forms. And then what the Buddha gives her, this is another aspect of the story of ourselves, is non-judgmental presence. No one else would talk to her. In the midst of her deepest pain, she was shunned by her neighbors, perhaps by extended family. And the Buddha approaches her. He puts himself in her path with a non-judgmental presence, loving kindness. And through that, he helps her find her way back to herself, back to her body, back to this earth, back to the grief in a dose that her body can actually process. Well, this is part of what we're cultivating in practice. The courage the Buddha demonstrated and presence to companion ourselves, to meet what is arising, whatever it is. Feelings, emotions, body sensations. We're developing, cultivating the courage and presence to meet them without getting overwhelmed by them or lost in them, but also without pushing them away. This can feel like a dynamic tension as we learn to practice a more and more refined and deep and embodied mindfulness. Sometimes it might feel like riding the waves of an emotion or feeling discomfort as part of a much more textured experience, or finding space or even love within a sensation. And we begin to realize that all sensation, emotion, feeling changes. It's changing. Impermanence has a beautiful quality to it. So let's return now to the 7 wise sisters. Whatever it is that brought us to this sesshin, we are here. And we're walking deeper into the charnel grounds of sesshin. Our way is one of sitting, one of breathing, one of feeling the body, even as the mind tries and tries to resolve all the problems in our lives and in the world. We're ambitious. The first couple of days of sesshin can feel a bit like meeting corpses. Our active, worried minds flittering here and there. The subtle sensations of breath, perhaps barely noticeable. One of the sisters says, "Here is the person's body. Where has the person gone?" And such an interesting question, so relevant for sesshin. Here we are, bodies sitting upright, bodies walking, bodies eating, bodies lying down. But where are we really? Trying to resolve problems at work while our body sits in the zendo. Trying to fix the past while our body chops potatoes. Or come up with a plan to fix the future as our body takes a shower. Or thinking about that show or movie or song lyric that I just can't remember. Or that person, you know, the one who said that thing at work. Here is a person's body. Where has the person gone? It's totally normal. Our minds are active. For the mind to be someplace else as our body sits and breathes. Our minds are so good at keeping themselves occupied, generating more to think about, worry about, fix, or resolve. In Sesshin, we are invited to discover or rediscover our bodies from the ground up. Rediscovering our breath from within the breath. We're making a shift from thinking our experience to experiencing our experience. From thinking our breath to feeling our breath. And that takes time. It takes time to discover the rich landscapes of the breath, to allow ourselves to feel and notice the subtle changes of body sensation as we breathe. It's an advanced practice to let the body breathe itself, or to be able to rest body and mind simply in themselves. So you might discover that as you attempt to sink into the full inhalation, that you feel a little bit of sensation in the nostrils, some movement in the abdomen, and not much else. Or that the pause or space at the bottom of the exhalation at the moment feels quite elusive. Is this something Jomon's making up? I invite you to stay curious and challenge yourself from time to time to feel more of the breath. And that, Chosen always tried to make meditation fun, and I recommend it. So it doesn't mean force yourself to feel every sensation of the breath for 25 minutes straight with this kind of like, I'm gonna do this. But like, I wonder right now if I could, how much of the breath I can feel. Can I feel the whole exhalation? Okay, I felt a little bit of movement in my chest, a little in my abdomen. I'm feeling a little bit more in my abdomen now. There is like a little pause, and then the inhale comes. It's just like allowing ourselves to discover each breath is completely unique. We can just make a practice of discovery. And then maybe we'd ease up a little, and then the next time, okay, I'm going to see if I can feel the exhale and the inhale this time. And bringing curiosity. The first couple days of Sesshin, the mind is unruly. So we can find perhaps moments of interest, moments where we can relax into. Then the mind kind of bounces off, and then we come back as we're ready. Another practice that we have in the Zen tradition that can be really helpful for aligning body and mind, or breath and awareness, is Sosokan breathing. And it can help us because we emphasize in Sosokan breathing the exhale. It brings more sensation usually to the experience of breathing. So it can just highlight it a little bit more, give us a little bit more to sink our awareness into. And many of you probably have learned this practice, but I'll go over it just so you know it. So usually with Sosokan breathing, we let the inhalation be natural. And then we emphasize the exhalation. Now I'm breathing with my mouth open so you could hear sound, so it wasn't just like silent. But you would just do that internally. And so sometimes we add a number there. So you feel the inhalation. And then you would count inside your mind, in your head, the whole exhalation. And then there's a little pause. There was a pause just now, and then the inhalation comes. And as you're making the mental sound of the counting, or sometimes I like to use words instead, like rest, you're also feeling where you feel that emphasized exhalation in your body. So you're merging the inner sound of counting or word with the sensation of the exhalation. And it gives you something to ride that exhalation down on and to begin to feel it maybe more and more in your body. Maizumi Roshi, I heard this through Chosen, so I never met Maizumi Roshi, but apparently he used to count to 10 for the beginning of every Zazen period. He would do 10 Sokan breathing. Because it can be so beautiful way of just like really anchoring our attention in our bodies. And then when we find like our minds are so scattered, it can be something to come back. But you might not do it the whole period. It can be a little exhausting, but it can be something that's just so helpful to come back to yourself, feel that breath, and then ease up, and you can feel the breath maybe more subtly. It can be difficult to feel our bodies because our bodies feel a lot. And so we've developed ways of escaping the discomfort of the body or the discomfort of our emotions. And usually the simplest escape is to think. I remember one of my early sesshin, I said to the teacher, I don't really feel pain when sitting. And they were like, oh, that's interesting. And then I blurted out in like a pretty unconscious way, I just think about something and then I don't even feel my body. I don't know what you all are struggling with. Talking about pain. Here is my body. Where did the person go? And this isn't a bad strategy, right? Once it became conscious, I could have so much more compassion for the part of me that felt like it needed to escape discomfort. The part of me that loved thinking. And I could work on cultivating courage to feel my breath, to feel the places of tension and discomfort in my body, to feel fear or anger or sorrow in real time as they arose in my experience. And I wasn't ready to let go of the strategy all at once. It took time. It takes time. It's still taking time to build that capacity and trust. To take the call to enter the charnel ground is a way of bringing consciousness or awareness to these habitual or unconscious ways of being, thinking, living, and feeling. When Inanna gets to the main gate of the underworld, she is asked why she has come. And she answers, and then she's told that she has to pass through the 7 gates of the underworld. And at each gate, she must remove or surrender another layer of protection until she shows up in the underworld naked and bowed down. And Sesshin invites a similar kind of shedding. Jomon has been emphasizing letting go, which is different than trying to get rid of what we don't like. It's an invitation to surrender a little bit more to the feeling of the breath, to the experience of the body right here, right now. In the Parinirvana Sutta, the Buddha faces a similar invitation to shed, to let go, and he relinquishes his will to live. There's this really interesting interaction where the Buddha is kind of feeling Ananda out, or giving Ananda the opportunity to ask the Buddha to extend his life. And Ananda doesn't really get that that's what the Buddha's doing, so he misses the opportunity. He asks once and the Buddha says no, and then he asks again and the Buddha says no, but he doesn't ask a third time. And the Buddha would have said yes. So the Buddha says later in the sutta. So at that moment, the Buddha relinquishes his will to live, and so knows that in 3 months' time from this conversation with Ananda that he will pass. But he doesn't tell Ananda right away. And so the Parinirvana Sutta, and I'm not going to read, it's like 46 pages printed, so we're not going to read every single word of it. So I'm just going to tell you this early part. We have this, we see the Buddha walking to these different places where he's taught throughout his 40 years of teaching. And he is, in his own way, like he's giving teaching still, but he's also saying goodbye to the place. But he's not doing it very publicly. There's this, when he leaves Vasali, he turns, he does the elephant look, which is turning his whole body. Because when an elephant looks, they turn their whole body to look, at least like their whole head, to look back at the place that he's leaving in a way of like really saying goodbye. And so he's doing that at various places where he's taught. And then he comes to, here, I have it. I have the sutta. He comes to Pava, and Kunda, the metal worker, invites the Buddha to teach. And Kunda is very excited that the Buddha is going to take a meal with him in the Buddha's assembly. And this, the Buddha knows, is going to be his last meal, because something that Kunda has prepared is soiled. It's not good to eat, but the Buddha eats it anyway out of respect and tells Kunda to bury the rest so that nobody else eats it. And then the rest of the monks eat the other food, or the monks and nuns eat the other food that Kunda has prepared. And so as the Buddha is taking leave of Kunda's place after teaching and having a meal with him, he starts to have dysentery, and a dire sickness fell upon him. He suffered sharp and deadly pains. And then it says, the Blessed One, the Buddha, endured them mindfully, clearly comprehending and unperturbed. So the Buddha's death involves the Buddha getting very sick. And I appreciate this teaching in the Parinirvana Sutras, because we really see the human side of the Buddha. He has a human body that is sick and weak. And he's teaching us through this that it's possible, through this practice, to develop equanimity in sickness, to practice with sickness. And we will see through the Buddha's story that he practices through the dying process as well, as his body gets more and more sick. So we also have this, Buddha has some extraordinary characteristics, and he knew he was going to die. And that's interesting. He knew he was going to die 3 months ahead. And then he knew he was going to die if he ate that food, and he ate it anyway. But it's interesting, like the Buddha did have this kind of way of seeing or knowing a little bit into the future, it seems. Sometimes it said the Buddha could read others' minds, could know what others were thinking. But even ordinary people sometimes know when their death is approaching. And maybe you've had relatives or loved ones who had a sense. Both of my grandmothers had a sense. They both had visits from deceased loved ones a day or two before they passed. And one of my grandmothers just told everyone, even though she wasn't sick, she was just saying goodbye and said, "I'm going to die tomorrow." And she did. So that's interesting. My grandmothers weren't awakened as far as I know. They were faithful people. So I'd like to close this talk with just a short poem. It's called Antidotes to the Fear of Death. Sometimes, as an antidote to the fear of death, I eat the stars. Those nights lying on my back, I suck them from the quenching dark, till they are all inside me, pepper hot and sharp. Sometimes, instead, I stir myself into a universe still young, still warm as blood. No outer space, just space. The light of all the not yet stars drifting like a bright mist. And all of us and everything already there, but unconstrained by form. And sometimes it's enough to lie down here on earth, beside our long ancestral bones, to walk across the cobble fields of our discarded skulls, each like a treasure, like a chrysalis, thinking, whatever left these husks flew off on bright wings.